On this episode of the Warrior Woodshop, we're going to take these basic, simple prefabricated screens and turn them into a full COVID enclosure. Stay tuned. The challenge that we have to overcome is a large area that needs to be screen protected. And the little 3-foot screens that have been provided just aren't going to quite do it. You could put more and more, but people just have a tendency to stand off to the side and talk to the person one-on-one. You've seen that at numerous businesses, numerous cash registers, things like that. So the solution we come up with, as you can see here in the SketchUp drawing, is a full 32-foot wall. We're going to use standard dimensional lumber. We're going to have basically frame each section in and add some supports at the bottom. The key to these supports is the way they're cut. We're not just adding a vertical or a diagonal brace here. We're adding notches. So this is not just screwed in and glued. By adding this notch, it allows 150% of the glue surface versus just butt joining and adding screws. The other thing we're going to do is when these horizontal members intersect the vertical uprights, they're going to get a notch which actually will double the amount of glue surface if we were just using the screws and glue technique. Plus, it allows it to rest on a ledge versus relying on the nails, screw, and glue to do all the work. The other debate we are having is how much clearance at the bottom. 2, 3, 4, 6 inches. We ultimately realized that it's papers, passes, envelopes that are going to go underneath, so we do 2 to 4 inch range. 2 got a little tight. 4 seemed to work out, so what we actually settled on was 3.5, so that way, since we're using all dimensional lumber, a short section of 2x4 could be used as a horizontal support in the middle of the full 8-foot sheet. What we've discovered by building a prototype, and there's a big key to building a prototype, is 1/8-inch Plexiglas, 1/8-inch blades. They're not truly 1/8-inch, so we're going to have to actually make a double cut, and I'll show you how to do that more with the table saw when that comes time. Again, the advantage of building a prototype. The last thing we did, the sheets come 4 foot wide. We built this prototype and got into the office, and this is rubbing the ceiling on one section. So instead of staggering it, we're just going to make it 3 foot all the way across. That extra foot that we cut off will allow for some vertical screens later if we decide we need them. The other thing it does, it allows the sound to travel over to the people on the other side a little bit easier, so it's easier to hear and understand. Now, if you're building just a single frame, like we have 6 sections in our frame, if you're building just a single frame, you could get away with 1x2 lumber. We're having to use 2x2, because hopefully you can see this in the close-up camera, after I about knocked that over. We have to come in 1/2 inch on each side, which that would leave no material in the middle. So by using 2x2 lumber, it allows for more glue surfaces, but it allows an area for the slot for both sides to go into. So the first thing we need to do is get our lumber, do some rough cutting at the crosscut saw. I'll see you over there. We're over here at the miter saw to do our rough cuts for all of our pieces. We don't want to cut them to exactly the same length because we don't know dado depths and notches exactly. But before we use the saw, I want to take a moment to credit one of the most well-known television woodworkers, Norm Abrams from the New Acre Workshop. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety protocols that come with your power tools, because knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there's no more important safety rule than to wear these, your safety glasses. Alright, now that we've got all of our pieces cut, since they're a rough cut to height, since they're 2x4s, we're going to get 2 out of each one, so there's actually twice as much material here. We're going to take one of the scraps though and make a prototype so we can test cut and all that kind of stuff on a scrap piece before we're using our good one. So Now we've got a couple of setup blocks ready to go. We're going to go ahead and finish cutting our main ones for the uprights. Alright, the next thing we've got to do is create our notch for the plexiglass to go into. And to do that, we've got to, since we're not cutting all the way through, we've got to take the splitter off the table saws. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use the guard system either, so this is got to be a little bit careful. We're going to set it to a 1/2 inch. I'm going to center the blade on that mark. What I also have is a piece of scrap plexi to do a test fit with. To widen it and get it perfectly centered, I'm going to do a rotate, not a flip. And I realize that's why you do a test cut. That's just a little bit too wide. It doesn't take much to do the adjustment because everything is multiplied. And as Goldilocks said, just right. Again, that proves the point of having practice pieces or setup blocks, because that fits in there real good. Nothing to dab of silicone won't keep from moving around. So now we're going to do it to all of the uprights and horizontal. So all 4 pieces on every frame will get that cut. Let's get to it. Okay, since 4 of our uprights or 4 of our joints have 45-degree angles, we need to change the blade angle to 22.5 and create miters. There we are. So we got to finish up the rest of them. By creating that 22.5 degree miter, it creates a 45-degree corner for our countertop. Alright, as we mentioned earlier in the video, the thing that's going to make these uprights strong is cutting a notch. We've got our layout set up on the first one. We're going to use a stop block so we don't have to measure everyone out. The only problem we're running into with this dado blade setup is the max is 3/4. We need 1.5 inch dado, so we're going to do all the cuts with the stop block set on position number 1, readjust it for position number 2. That fits in there nice and snug, and when you actually line up the grooves, that'll create all that we need. We're using the prototype that we've already made. What we're going to do is set up for our feet. The factor that we have to consider is this is a short piece and this is a dangerous cutting blade. So what we're going to do is make this in a series of cuts. We're going to cut this end, flip it around, cut this end off, send it over to the miter saw, and we're going to cut it off and then repeat the process. That way we're handling a longer board on each one of these cuts. The process will involve cutting it with the stop block and sliding it over. Since it's just off the end, there's no problem if it goes a little bit too far, and we'll just notch it away, nibble it away until we get that cut. In woodworking, there's a lot of variables. You could have the most well planned out project, but when it comes to actually using the machines, those are variables that can affect your final outcome. So one of my techniques is not to cut it to final length until I'm ready to use that piece. This is a good example because we have dado depths, dado heights, and then we have the width of the plexi that has to go into a dado on each side. All those are 1, 2, 3, 4 different places that even a minute discrepancy can affect the total outcome. So if you remember back at the crosscut saw, the first part of the project, we didn't cut this to length. Okay? We know that our dado or groove in the end of the piece is a 1/2 inch deep. We actually want to be maybe 7/16 taller. We want the plexiglass to be 7/16 taller than the side frame so that doesn't actually force the top rail up. So that's why we haven't cut it to length. We can get a final exact measurement. We're 35.5, so we're going to cut it just a strong 35 from this point, which then makes the total length a shy 40, which is about, I would have cut it 40 and it would have been too long. So see how that worked out, that there's, between the 4 processes we have to do, there's a 1/16 of an inch difference. That's a 1/64 of an inch off, which most of the time in woodworking they'd say, wow, that's great. But in 4 different places that added up to a 1/16. So hopefully you can see the benefit of waiting until you exactly need it. And then the advantage too we have is all these were cut on a stop block, so all the uprights are the same length. Now in our cross members, our horizontal frame members, we're going to have to cut those on site. So we're not doing any fancy joinery. We're going to just use the butt joint and screw here. That is so it can be installed and removed when the time comes. If you were doing a permanent install for a desk or cash register, I would probably do a 45-degree angle, make it look a little nicer. But in our setting, this is going to be against the wall or way up high to where that basic joinery won't be as visible. And again, it comes down to being able to install it and remove it when the time comes. You can kind of hear the router in the background. We've just got back from easing all the edges. That way there's no sharp corners that people happen to lean on or touch the framework. The next step is to get our leg and our upright and foot together. This is a great opportunity for a tool called the assembly square, because I'm sure we've all had to enlist help to try to hold something in a particular angle or a particular spot, and that never goes well. Get it 90. Try harder. 90 degrees, come on. Need something else. So by using the assembly square, it helps hold it at 90 degrees with a couple of quick acting clamps. And then we're going to final assemble it with brad nails. Since we're painting, we're not too worried about glue squeeze out, we just rub it off. If it was a stain project, obviously you'd want to make sure that it's wiped off with a wet rag. Nice and strong. Next thing we got to do is add our 45-degree brace just for aesthetics and extra support. Since we have several 45-degree corners, we've got to take 2 uprights, which we've already beveled at 45, and glue them together before we can put the leg on there. This is where an extra helper is going to come into play. The end still lined up. Right here too. Again, we're not too concerned about it since we're painting. Just using a simple wet paper towel. Dry fit this. Try not to get glue in the plexiglass slot. If you do, stick a piece of cardboard or something in there to clean it out. That's 3 out of 7. All right, before we put this diagonal brace on, we're going to do all the sanding just so that way it's not in the way. Match it up with the bevel on the foot, and this is we already pre-cut these, just knowing what we're going to do. One nail there, get everything tight. One nail there. A little bit of final sanding and puttying, and there's our vertical support. All right, that whole sanding session took 14 minutes according to the time code, so probably more like 11 or 12. As you can tell, it's not very hard sanding. It's just almost like you're dusting it, just a once over. And it's amazing the impression. I mean, now that we're sanding these to 320, it's going to make the final outcome that much better. Unfortunately, the case is people judge the structure or the quality of your project. Even though we put all the structure and time into making these things strong, they judge the overall quality based on the finish. Those two don't go hand in hand, but they work well together when they're done right. So take the time, go through the sanding process, go through the finishing process, take your time, do it correctly, and somebody's going to say that's a good project or wow, that's a good project. Even though it's the same 3 words, finishing's the difference. So now we're going to go through and roller and spray paint everything for their final coat. When you're working indoors with spray paint, make sure you wear an N95 mask for the reason they were actually invented for. Well, there you go. 30 feet of plexiglass screened wall. Give me a second, let me turn the camera around. Each piece is basically built the same way. An upright, dadoed in, and attached to the countertop. So you can make this any length you want. Again, if you have any comments or questions, put them in down below. Now go out and make some sawdust.